We're just giving this Bondo some extra time to dry. We finished up that part of it on the last tape. We also have our, let's see where it is here, our top block mold. And things at this time of year, the shop goes into full mode. I guess from this point on, you're going to see chips flying and hopefully a lot of things getting done. We're looking forward to a great season. Mike Kajeski's due over here. It looks like we're going to have a great day for painting. So now this is a good point. While this stuff is drying, find something to do so you're not making yourself crazy. Okay, we got what amounts to be a real good day for painting out here. The only problem is we got a little breeze and of course there's leaves everywhere. This is the first time you ever sprayed clear, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, it looks good. So far, so good. He's putting acrylic 380S with what's left of our 3608S thinner, some fisheye killer, and make sure if you're doing acrylic, you put some Flexol in it. Absolutely must put the Flexol in. Now let's take the cowling off too, Mike. Don't paint it in position or then you can't get it off. You know, pull that off. I'll set it up so we could spray that set. No, I'll get a little jig made to hold that up, and get plenty in by where the motor is. You know, down in there. That you can do while it's upside down. You don't want to have that you got raw wood exposed. The fly tradition with the nose weight?
No, not yet.
Oh, what a day to go flying today. I bet there's 50 guys up the field.
Yeah.
Let me kind of hold this for you. Yeah, this is the nicest day we had in a long time.
Okay.
This will dry right up today, too. Hold that if you can with your other hand, just while you're doing the edges. That's good. And what we do is we let this side dry and then we'll flip it. Perfect example of what I was talking about, the cowl being too big. In my estimation, my knowledge has shown me this kind of cowling always have a problem with the motor in. Small cowl, small cowl. By the way, I got some of this Bondo sanded off. First coat off camera, and I'm going to put a second coat in here, trying to work with Mike while this is, we got such a nice day for painting. Now while Mike's painting away out there, and we want to use that day, it's always easier to get this on in two thin layers. I don't know why, it always seems like I need a second coat. There's little spots I miss. You can see how easy the second coat goes right on. And what makes this possible is having that CA, that base of CA on there. If you try to go over raw wood, it could be a problem. Not always, but it can be. So if you do this in two coats, you're almost always going to get it real easily. And this is turning out to be a good day. We're getting a lot done here. But of course, now before I mold up another piece, I want to make a very strong decision here. If this piece was on the small side, that second coat can dry out, and we'll go get some more paint on Mike's plane. Okay, you got one coat on the whole bottom. Let's pull it inside. Let it sit for a minute or so. We'll pull it downstairs, let it dry, give it 15-20 minutes. How much of that paint did you use? You got about half left? Half?
Maybe a quarter.
Okay. All right. Now you're not going to have to do any more. We'll put the rest of the paint on the top. Because you always put a little more on the top than on the bottom. Okay, a little tip you can use. It's worth its weight in gold. Mike's got an ink pen. And on a black plane or whatever, since he sanded it out, little spots that you go through, which usually are the edge, put a light coat of India ink on. The acrylic clear will blend that right in. You'll never even see it when it's done. It's an old Glenn Meta trick. Give Glenn full credit for that one. You know, it's just a little touch-up. It'll make it just a little bit better, Mike, than like if you just went on. Now what we did, because we're trying to use up the best air of the day here, we really have a very limited amount of time. We just put the gear legs in. Normally we'd wait and let this sit in a rubber pad. Put it on a table with some duct tape holding the gear so that Mike then can spray all the upper surfaces. And again, I'm not a crazy in love with finishing friends because I've seen the noses tweak and bend and crack and everything when they're not used properly. I guess you could use it properly, but I like to support the plane on more than just the little pinpoint action in the nose. Any other little spots you see black, just touch them up, give it 5 minutes, and then we'll shoot the clear on it. Now, if you do this with paint, the problem is you get like it's higher than the paint around it, but ink kind of sits right down in there. Any little imperfection you get. Yeah, this is you know, for your first effort at a full finish, I'd say this is real nice. Just walk around, look around, any little, it's usually going to be the edges, Mike. It's always the edges that you wind up ginching. Okay, when you think you got them all, we'll go get the gun out and let's shoot away.
Yeah, I think
that's about it? Okay. Anyway, for somebody who actually, this is their first full finish plane, and they're busy building a Cardinal, I'm sure within weeks we're going to see what's the bones of the Cardinal. It's a good first effort. Now what we did, we put two little 8-ounce cups of clear on the bottom. And when the rest of the paint, which is probably about 2/3, is going to go on the top of the airplane, it'll probably give us 2 good coats. And this way, since we're trying to keep the weight to a minimum here, this guy's a little bit on the heavy side anyway, it's always good technology. If the plane's getting too heavy, dark colors and a lot of clear on the top. You can always paint the outboard wing as much as you want. You can paint the nose section from the canopy forward, but you want to keep the inboard wing light. You certainly don't want to paint the tail heavy, so you don't wind up needing, you know, 4 or 5 ounces of nose weight to balance the plane. Now the whole idea here is to get the wing wet with no zebra stripes and 1 stroke of the pen, and don't get around. It's going on nice, Mike.
Oh yeah.
Just don't get carried away where we got a sand runs out. It's a nice day. Even if you want to let this coat dry a half an hour while we have lunch, no problem. I'd rather do that than have a run.
Got it.
Now the idea here is to overlap each stripe so that you don't have a spot where there's a dry, let's see if we can see one, a dry, he's not making any, so it's a little difficult to do. To overlap it just enough that at some point in time that whole panel is wet. It has a wet look without getting a run. You're on a little bit of a curve here. If you overdo it, of course, you'll get runs. Do is just before we put the last coat on, we'll put just a little more thinner in the paint so that last coat just lays right out. This actually worked out pretty good, having them on a table like that. It worked out well. And there won't be many days left this year that we can paint outside, so good thing we got to use this one. That's the whole trick, is to get each stripe to overlap the stripe before, so you don't get a dry stripe going right down. So at some point in time you have equal, see, this one is perfect, equal distribution of the paint, and then just let it lay down. Is ready. Okay, well, as soon as we're done painting, you can bring it downstairs. I don't want to walk up into the house while we're all painty. We're going to go downstairs. Put it on the workshop table, okay? Mike's all engrossed here. You don't want to hear about it.
I'm crazy, man.
No, this is coming out good, Mike. You'd be surprised how many people, you know, this takes more time than 1 or 2 planes for most people to figure out, but it looks like you're getting it real good. Now, here's a good tip when you're painting. Mike just found out the hard way. Don't wear a long sleeve shirt. It ran right into the wing while he was painting. Now this last coat we have about, it's probably way more than half thinner. Mike's just dusting on a coat. Another good tip is, all the while he's been painting, he's been running the stripes span-wise, and I suggested to him put that last coat on with the thinner, with the stripes going this way, so it just minimizes the amount of sanding he's going to have to do somewhere down the road. And we will sand, probably give this a week to dry, sand it out, buff it. That might save you a little bit of sand out time, you know, when you...
Yeah.
Now, if you were going to do a 3rd coat, put them on a 45-degree angle, you know what I mean? So that they aren't all going in the same direction. As soon as you put this on, we'll save a little bit of the touch-up paint. and we'll put it downstairs to dry. Good show. I think you can put this guy in the bank. I was just looking this over. He doesn't have one run in the whole plane. What a guy. Boy, Midgley would be jealous. Yeah, he's a good man with the spray gun, too. And Sam Shirota, man, Sam-O-Matic. There you go. Never have to worry about putting too much paint on the nose. Damn things always need nose weight anyway. All right, I'll go get the table cleaned off. We'll put it inside to dry. Good.
Looks good, kid. Looks good.
This morning I got a little bit of time before I actually start the events of the day. So what I wanted to do is I want to get this second coat of Bondo sanded out. Again, keeping that front radius right there is where it's very difficult to get a nice fit. Because then every one that I mold from this plug will have exactly that contour. So I'd really like to get it right now. Not, you know, on every one I make, then I'm going to have to sand each one down. I want to get a nice finish on this, so I'm going to do a final sand out on this and get a couple of coats of auto primer on it, let it dry, and then next time I get down to the shop, I can work from there. The hardest part is getting that nice little lip right there. That's the toughest part. And the nice thing about Bondo, it sands real easy. If you have to go back and do it over and over again, you sand too much. I had some areas back here I went to that. Just put more on top. And if you let it dry 24 hours like this has been drying, it's really very easy to sand. What makes it possible is having the wood hard with the CA. You don't want to go into soft balsa wood. Hardened wood and this and a plywood edge will give me a perfect edge up here in the mold. Now again, real important to get the edges true. Hey, I've been watching all this electric flight. Georgino had sent me three of these tapes with electric flight, and on one of them there's a Spitfire. Hey, if you have any interest in electric flight, I'll be glad to share these tapes with you. Absolutely great footage. And there's a Spitfire, an electric Spitfire with retracts. Somewhere on this tape I'll try to get a little clip. It only runs about a minute, minute and a half. Very, very interesting, very creative stuff. They get the final contours, especially in the back with some 220, and this will be ready to mount. Okay, the next step with the final sanding done, the next step here is I want to mount this on a piece of plywood as a base. Now, any old piece of scrap plywood is fine. This is 1/8 inch light ply. I want to make it at least, you know, a 1/2 inch bigger than the cowl itself. Get it on all sides equal. Similar anyway. Okay, the next step is going to be to position this on here and nail it down with some thick CA. The reason I want to use thick CA along the edge is I want to build the edge up. I don't want to have the edge a little reverse lip in there. I want to have a very tiny radius, if anything, there. Now the idea here is to get a reasonably smooth edge, a little bit of a radius, but not a giant radius. And the Q-tips will give us just about the radius we want. A little lesson I learned on making a Spitfire plug, you don't want to have that little reverse cup in there. You can see just the little amount of radius that's in there. That's about right. And there's always just a little bit of that C8 that works its way up on the cowl, so I want to make sure this is perfect. Everything that's in this plug will come out in the final mold. Now what I'm going to do is put a couple of coats of auto primer. You see I haven't used this in a while. It's all down at the bottom. A couple of coats of auto primer on this. I'll brush them on. It isn't important. Hey, and while it's drying out, I'll go through that footage that Georgina sent. That electric flight stuff is cool. There's a flying wing. There's a Spitfire. There's stuff even I didn't realize. If you have any interest in electric flight, I'll put that address on there. Send away for the tapes. They're great tapes. I have really enjoyed them. Now, one of the little tips, tricks, whatever you want to call it here, is get the paint on nice and thin. If you want to spray it, and I had some spray primer. I looked in the cabinet. I don't have any anymore. But since we're going to sand this off, we'll probably put 2 or 3 coats on. I'm just blowing this on while this is drying. Hey, there's another. I haven't even seen the third one of these electric flight tapes. Now, see, that's just another thing about modeling. You think, you know, you've got a pretty good handle on. You've seen everything, done everything. And then you see something like, now I wasn't even aware that they ran these things, float planes, multiple engines, all electric. It's pretty impressive, and especially the Spitfire. The Spitfires do. I'm going to put that on right after, while this paint is drying, in fact. And that's another thing, having a nice variety of interests. What it allows you to do is not get too caught up in, you know, things that might otherwise make you crazy. You know, whatever you feel the injustices in the event are. Believe me, everybody does. But if you have varied interests, you realize everybody's a modeler at heart, almost everybody. And we really do have a lot of neat stuff to share. Okay, let's see what's on that tape while this is drying.
The first model you see taking off here is Keith Shaw's famous Spitfire. The Spitfire is powered by an Astro 40 Cobalt motor fitted with an Astro gearbox. The airplane has retracts and is quite realistic. It won second place in Finish Award at Toledo show about 5 years ago. Keith is an excellent pilot and can show off these airplanes to the greatest effect. Goes into a spin, 3-turn spin, pulling out. The Spitfire weighs about 5 pounds, and it's quite aerobatic. There you see a very slow roll. A low pass for the camera. Here he's coming in for a landing. Beautiful. The plane taking off now is a Hawker Hurricane, powered by an Astro 40 Cobalt motor. This plane also is quite aerobatic. Hurricane is touching down and now is taxiing back to the operator. Figured it out, and here's his next takeoff. The B-17 has a 72-inch wingspan. It uses 4 Cobalt 035 geared motors and a total of 24 cells, or 6 cells per motor. Multi-engine airplanes are always crowd pleasers. You always get a good gathering of people to come and watch a multi-engine airplane fly. Oh, flipped over. Is a unique airplane, the King Crimson. King Crimson, originally designed by Keith, using 4 Leisure 05 geared motors. It's a large airplane, approximately 12 feet in the wingspan, 12 feet, and it weighs about 10 or 12 pounds. The speed is around 70 miles an hour. Pretty clever for such a big airplane. Setting up on the final. Gear should be coming down. There you go, gear down. And we have touchdown right now. Very nice.
Right, here's the address if you think you want to give them a buzz, a call, get a list of their videos. The 3 of them that I have are really worthwhile, very interesting, and I thank George again for sharing this with us. Just gives you one more dimension, and you always can get ideas. You always can get some inspiration and ideas from the varied world of modeling here. Thanks a lot. I'm really impressed with these electric videos. I have to tell you, I saw Art Animeson, I believe, at the 91 Nats, 92 Nats, and he had an electric stunt ship. Boy, would that be nice. Talk about not having a lot of aggravation. Can't buy the motors, can't buy the parts. Somebody out there ever could come up with a Super Tiger 60 electric motor, boy, I'd be impressed. That 2 Ford. I wonder if you're just thinking about crazy things, how crazy people are, and I'm certainly the craziest one of all. Imagine if you could put a switch, a gravity switch inside the plane so the motor would go into 2 throttle positions, which is really what a Super Tiger 60 or any good stunt motor does. You point the nose up, it goes to full power. You point the nose down, it, for all purposes, shuts the motor off. Now, I know there's a lot of guys out there that know all about electricity and batteries and stuff. Probably could figure that out. A dummy like me, you know, I can't jump start my car half the time. Anyway, these tapes are great, and I watch them over and over again. It just adds one more dimension into to my involvement in the hobby. All right, I'm going to give this one more coat off camera later. Karen's got a list of stuff for me to do. You want to get a real good coat of auto primer on here. Just don't forget, this final finish is going to come out in the final product of the mold. Now, I let this dry all day. And the last thing I can do tonight, before I pack it in tonight, I just want to rub this down with some, this is 4-0 steel wool. This is good for buffing up the primer. Now the reason I'm doing this tonight instead of in the morning is if I buff through a spot and I really have to go back and touch it up, I can get another coat of auto primer on here, and then of course take my chances in the morning. But usually this'll more or less buff it right up, give it a nice smooth surface. And tomorrow when I come down the shop, I'll make the box for the mold and get the RTV ready. Just maybe 10-15 minutes of this, and you'll see you get a really nice polished surface. This is just ordinary 4-0 steel wool. I don't know if you can even see this up close, what a nice finish that gives it. And it'll be ready tomorrow morning to make the box up. Now after sanding this and steel wooling it down and everything, I want to get one more coat of primer on here, so I figure I put the last coat on with spray. I got the old Krylon spray. Since we're not putting a finish on this, it won't really matter, but being this is all I can do tonight. See, now if I was in a rush, I would leave off this coat, but kind of at the end of this evening here. So this will dry overnight. We'll make the box tomorrow. Now this is not a great idea if you were going to, you know, paint a plane. You wouldn't want to be using this kind of primer, but for making molds, this is fine. And we used this last year on the Spitfire mold, so I know this is compatible with the RTV. All right, we'll let this dry overnight. We'll pick this up in the morning. Now what I thought I'd do before we go on to the next step of this, because obviously we have a lot of new people that have not gone through this, and this is a key part. If you're going to try to make some molds, any kind of molding, you're going to have to, more than likely, unless you do this for a living or something, you're going to have to figure out the do's and don'ts. And I figured I'd take a few minutes and put these on the video since it's appropriate for this part. When I did the Spitfire, I wanted to make a fiberglass cowling. For a lot of reasons, it's lighter by far, it's stronger by far, and I wanted to be able to make every one exactly the same. Now in the course of making and selling about 100 sets of Spitfire plans, I've made up a lot of cowlings from this mold. This was made out of dental plaster in a little box. I made it from this plug, and you can see how this evolved This is the release agent that's on here. But the whole point that I'm trying to make is this stuff evolves, and if you're going to use, as an example, this is just ordinary dental plaster. You can buy this in an art supply store, real inexpensive. You have to use release agent on it. It's really a pain in the ass to get the parts out sometimes, sometimes not, and it does deteriorate in time. After you make 20, 30 cals, it's kind of beat up. So, and again, if you haven't seen this evolve in the Spitfire videos, you know, you've missed one of the real adventures of life. But when I abandoned that, I went and made a, and I don't know, I guess I have it over there in a drawer. I made a polyester resin mold from this piece. Now the polyester resin mold was a lot better, and that served its purpose, making more cowlings. But even that in time gets to be a pain in the neck. You got to put release agent in it. You got to be careful one part doesn't stick to the other one. And what I did is when I started making these parts, I started making them with polyester resin, which is real easy to use. Almost anybody can figure out how to use that. But it's relatively weak relative to epoxy and carbon fiber. So what I decided to do is, after the Spitfire was complete, I made up a couple of carbon fiber cowlings with different material that I had gotten and different resins. And then found out I could make the cowls even lighter and even stronger just by using better materials. Again, I did a lot of experimental ones with polyester. They were okay, and they're definitely better than balsa wood, but still no cigar. But after evolving and after doing this many times, I came up with this, and of course Ed Gallagher was the one that helped me every step of the way. Came up with this material. This was our landing gear, Spitfire landing gear. And it's a soft material. It's a molding rubber. I'm going to put this up on the screen so you can see, get the information if you want to try it. But what I'm going to try now is with the new cowling, with this guy here. I'll give this a real light sanding. I put several coats of primer on this. I want to try to get a mold made with the, what I'll call the rubber, and make it in a little box. And the object of doing this is now you need no mold release agent. You see, this stuff evolves. You don't learn this all in one stroke of the pen. In fact, even if you look at and buy all these videos the fiberglass companies sell, they kind of skip over the things you really need to know. And you have to kind of do a little evolution, and at the end of the evolution you wind up with what I hope is going to be the best system, is going to be a rubber mold for these cowlings that, now that I have a real nice plug, I have the best rubber compound, I won't need any release agent, and the thing I'm shooting for is somewhere down the road, maybe at the end of the year, maybe if I have to wait some gap in time for Joe to finish framing the wings, I'll make a plug and try to make a whole fuselage mold out of this hard rubber. I don't know that that's going to be an appropriate way to do it, a realistic way, but it's one of the things I want to try. Again, this material worked out so well. The only problem I found with using it is you really had to be accurate about mixing the catalyst in with the compound. And the other part that was a pain is when I did this with George, I was stirring it up like it was a malted milk, and I got air bubbles in it, which I have to grind out. So when I mix the rubber and the catalyst, I want to mix it real slow. So given the fact I've evolved all this information into what I hope is going to be a very successful way of doing things, now you come along, you watch the video, hopefully you can make this, you know, on the first shot. You don't have to go back and buy molding plaster and buy all these resins and compounds and all of this junk and all these release agents. You can skip that whole part of it, go right on to making a real nice plug, and a plug just needs to have a reasonably nice finish. This doesn't have to be, you know, polished stainless steel or anything. A reasonably nice finish, the nicer the better. And then I'm going to make, the same as I made this, a little box out of balsa wood, confine this, and then get that rubber poured in here. When it dries, I'm going to turn it over and take this piece out, and that cavity that's left in there, which will look like this, I hope I'm going to be able to make an unlimited amount of Seafire cowlings for all of the people who hopefully will want to use this cowling or this style. Keep in mind another thing, this style of cowling is a very traditional. There's no reason you can't use this on any design, including a Cardinal, an SV11, a Paul Walker plane, or whatever. All you would need to do is calculate in where this line goes, cut your fuselage side that way, and you've got a cowling. No block, no carving, no sanding, and Don't do that at home with balsa wood. See on the macro lens, here's what's wrong with plaster mold. See how they, and again, remember I made about 20 or 30 cowlings out of this mold, maybe more. If you go back and look at the video, I probably did 20 on video. But the mold does deteriorate. That's what happens after some amount of time. It just gets rattier and rattier, and then you know, all the time you put into making it, well, I don't know, you know. But this was a very crude way of trying to do it. But it's, believe it or not, it served its purpose. You know, the cowling that's on the Spitfire came out of that mold. And what I do also, and this is probably I guess overkill, I save all my failures at molding, and I save all the parts I used, didn't use, could have used maybe, I don't know. I save them all, and I always try to write on them what was wrong with them, so that at a time like this, of all the exhaust manifolds, at a time like this, what I can do is kind of look back and say, gee, how could I have made this better, you know? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? It's always good. I have a drawer that says molds, and I keep everything, even the plugs, because you never know when you're going to go back and say, you want to say, gee, how did I do that? How did I do that? Yeah. Now, I know, for instance, making these spinner cones, I know this year when I make cones, I'm going to make them with RTV. I'm not going to make them, I'm not going to make hard. These are called hard molds. The mold is hard. In fact, these were so crude, and believe me, I was in the bottom of the learning curve, but I did get serviceable parts out of it. So as funny as it sounds, you know, laugh all you want, the thing won the concourse, so somebody had to vote for it. Now, another suggestion, if you're going to get into any kind of a molding program, you need to get a box or something. In this case, I took one of my kit boxes, and get all the things that are appropriate to molding, your resin, your release agent, rubber gloves, mask, whatever. In this case, I try to get it all in one area. The reason for that is later on, this stuff, you lose it, and you can't find, where's this, and where's that? What, this, the old one or the new one? You get messed up. So what I do is I have all my polyester stuff in one box, and one other box here I have has all the epoxy stuff. This has all the stuff for making the 5-bladed props, but all the carbon. Now keep in mind, if you do carbon, all the polyester resin and the what we'll call e-glass will never approach the strength of steel. You just can't do it. It's not possible. To get the strength of steel, you need to use epoxy and either carbon or Kevlar, and at least that's what the manuals say that I have. So what I have is I have a little box with all my carbon and Kevlar. The Kevlar is the yellow stuff. The carbon is the black stuff. The e-glass is the white stuff. And what I want to do is I want to make several attempts now, or hopefully, at getting these cowls even better and even lighter using different materials. Now I'm just going to take some 400 sandpaper before I make the box up. Go through my scrap balsa box. This Krylon primer, by the way, for doing mold work seems to work real well. Dries well, sands well. I don't know that it's even better than the stuff we use, the auto primer. It may be better, ultimately. When you're not looking for compatibility or to keep the weight down, that Krylon is a good choice. Again, I'll finish this off with some 400. Just get as smooth of a finish on it as I possibly can. Because the mold will pick up any imperfections you have here. The mold's going to pick up. Now, just let me mention, and I might not have mentioned this earlier. If you're going to use the rubber to some degree, you don't have to have all negative draft angles. In other words, you have to be able to pull this piece out of the mold. So if you had a little lip that went this way or a scoop or something, everything would have to be in negative draft angles, like a cone, so you could get the original part out. When you have rubber, though, if there's a little bit of reverse draft angle, it's not a problem. Now, in this case, it's not. We don't have a reverse draft angle. But even if we did, say if we had like a cardinal cowling, and we're going to make a cardinal cowling for Midgley or for somebody eventually, if we had a little scoop up here, something, you would not be able to do it with a hard mold. You'd have to do it with a soft mold. So even though this doesn't have that, having the soft mold technology down pat and having all the correct materials, each step of this is going to get better and better and better and better, to the point where I hope this'll just be a no problem to do anytime I want to do it in the very near future. Now I'm even, just before I put this together, going to take a little bit of Gorham's and just clean this up. Not going to spend too much time here, but it's amazing how Gorham's works. It even works on auto primer. Now, it may be that this is a little bit of overkill getting this polished like this. I don't know, but you know, the bottom line here is I'm trying to get my molding technology down to where it's really as professional as possible, and also that I can share these adventures and failures and everything with you. So a couple of people mentioned during the Spitfire videos, wow, you show all the mistakes you make too. That's good. Well, I think that's good too, because the average person that starts this, the first piece might not come out perfect. But hey, somewhere down the road it will, and when it does, boy, are you in Fat City once you get to this point. From this point on, this is a piece of cake. What I want to do, I want to make this on a flat surface. I want to measure and see exactly. I guess you can see. I want this to be at least a ½ inch deeper, so I guess I need about a 2-inch strip of wood so I can get the strip off 2 inches of scrap wood so that my box will be 2 inches in all dimensions. Now, I just thought of something else. I thought of a little bit of an improvement here. See, and this is the whole thing. As you go along, you think of improvements. I'll leave the box bigger than it has to be and just fill it with whatever extra RTV there is, because I won't be able to mix exactly the amount. So I'll leave the box 3 inches. There's no reason to make it smaller. I can trim it after the RTV dries. Now, what's funny is, and I really honestly believe that all the purposes of the videos are defeated if you cut out all the little bad spots, all the little mistakes. You got to leave the mistakes in. Now, again, last night when I was thinking about this, I never gave thought to the fact, why not just make the box oversized, and then you use up the rest of the RTV. It makes for a more firm, solid mold. Anyway, just going to glue this little box up together. There's no high-tech stuff going on here. But that's the whole point. As this evolves, it's such an adventure. I call it an adventure. To me, that's what the right word is. Because every time you go through this, and I hope some of the other people, now last year Jim Tishy, or Tishy, I can't maybe say his name right. Hey, I don't say anybody's name right. But he's a professional mold maker, and he gave me several good tips. And that's the whole fun of doing this, is to share. If one person knew everything, it wouldn't be that much fun. And before I true the box up, I want to make sure these joints are pretty solid, because if this box was to break after I mix the RTV, I'll lose the RTV, and it's relatively expensive. I think it's about $30 for a quart now. Now I want to get, this is that sandpaper that's taped to the table. Get a nice flat surface on this. Now I want to be able to obviously remove this piece at the end of making the mold. And this will just keep any extra RTV from coming out of the mold. Good old-fashioned duct tape. And this is just on here temporarily. See what I do? I make the corners like when you wrap a package. Let's see if I can show this. This makes it for a, well, it's should be liquid proof, that liquid won't be coming out of the mold. Just like wrapping a Christmas package. Okay, now so I should have a sealed box now. What I'm going to do is mix up, and I'll estimate how much material to put in here, but I want to cover this by at least a ½ inch. Material, now let's see, I'm not really sure, because Ed Gallagher purchased this for me, what the price is. I think it's in the $30 range, but you have enough to make several molds, that's for sure. You should really read the instructions, and I'm going to read them over again just to make sure. I think number one, it's a 10-to-1 mix, but again, I'll figure this out. I got a not for human injection. The reason they're putting this on here is they make breast implants out of this stuff. This is what it's what it's for. And this gives you really good edges. Okay, now it says mix with HS3, which is the other chemical. Florida Glue Products is the one that provides all this. 10-to-1 ratio. Now, one of the mistakes I made early on in this program was I tried to, hard to describe this. What I tried to do is mix this stuff like with an egg beater. The trick is, and this again was a good trick, is to take a whole batch and a whole batch of catalyst, pour one into the other, and now you need, well, I'll put a little bit at a time and mix this up slowly, slowly. Now this really is relatively easy material to work with, and I think the only way you could get yourself in trouble is if you egg beater it. You have plenty of cure time. This is like 24-hour cure time, so the best thing is just let it kind of cook, let it sit, but get it stirred plenty. Don't try to rush this stirring procedure. It takes a while to blend it in, and luckily the catalyst has a pink color, so when this is finished it'll have like a skin tone, fleshy color. Again, in the real world they use this for making prosthesis for people that have breast removed or any kind of body parts where they need the feel of skin and the texture of skin. It's kind of doughy, gooey material. And I found this out the hard way. Believe me, I wasted $30 worth of stuff to figure out that you can't put it in an egg beater. But we're going to be using this material hopefully over and over again. Now it comes in, and I haven't got the, I'm waiting for a reply. I called Florida Glue and they're going to get me some literature. This comes in various hardnesses. Super hard, medium, all kind of hardnesses. This is probably a medium weight. But if we do the full fuse mold, which maybe we will, maybe we won't. Boy, you never really know with time around here. What I'll look for is getting the harder of the molding materials. Again, just take your time. This is the critical step right here. This is not something you can just skim over. And you're not going to read about this in magazines or anything. You're not. Forget about it. Even the literature these companies put out is not that good for our purposes. Now I'm guessing, I'll do the rest off camera, it's about 5 minutes before all the pink totally disappears, and then you know you've got about another 5 minutes of mixing. It seems like, and I guess somewhere around this point in the procedure you think, wow, this took a lot of time. But when you see how quick you can make a cowl, and then you think, well, next year I can use the same cowl, and a year after, and then my buddy, Joe Blow, you can make a cowling for him. Wow. This eliminates lots and lots of wood and carving and sanding and dust and primer, and then of course the possibility that you could crash or scratch a cowl and you can pump out another one. Or in the case of Spitfires and Seafires, that they're both totally identical. You build a plane and you really love the way it flies. You make another wood plane, it isn't even in anything close. Well, when you make them out of composite, they're a lot closer, I think, to being exactly the same. Now we're going to use this over and over again. We're going to be using this for, just want to show how long it takes to get this material to really be smooth. I'd say a good 15 minutes of stirring is in order, 10-15 minutes, and slow stirring. No, you want to avoid making air bubbles. You want to get all that pink out of the mix. That's what I'm looking for, is to have it that it's all a consistent color. See, I may even be going a little too fast. I see something that looks like an air bubble there. Yep, see, that's an air bubble there. See, that's what I'm trying to avoid. At any cost, don't get air bubbles in it. Yep, there's another one. Actually, I'm trying to do that to show on camera how easy it is to, like, blow a bubble, more or less. Is just stir it slow like this. Is the whole trick to this material. Now, I've heard one of the tricks you can use is to pour this up along the edge. Oh boy, President Nixon's got a call. Let me see if I can catch this. All right, again, we never know when you're going to get a phone call around here. The trick that I had heard was, and I think I heard this from Wayne, to pour it up along the corner and let it run toward the mold. Now George had a good idea that we had used of running a jigsaw to kind of get all the air bubbles to come to the top. Now what I did last time, to show you how the learning curve works on molding, I had the mold on the top. I filled the box and then shoved the mold into it for the landing gear. Well, this way I hope the air bubbles are going to rise to the top. You can see how this is covering up. And I hope this is, again, those little improvements. I'm trying to get it to run into the corners, because it is self-leveling, and get as few of the air bubbles actually on the mold itself. And now I can just pour it. Now I hope this is going to, well, I guess we're going to find out tomorrow when we pull this sucker apart if we have any air bubbles. And so you can see all the air bubbles are starting to float to the top. Even though we're not going to use the top, I'm just trying to break them. I want to get all the air bubbles up to the surface. That's the whole idea of this. And then I think I'm getting into overkill here. But now the trick is, put this aside for 24 to 48 hours. Don't touch it. Don't play with it. It does have a little mild odor, and it probably is somewhat toxic, so I'll put it out in the machine shop, out where the drill press is, so it'll vent into the outdoors. But it's too cold outside to put it outdoors. If this were summer, I would leave it outdoors. Now you can even see, after a few minutes, you can see air bubbles rising to the top that weren't there before. That, I hope, means, and again, this is how you learn, I hope that means that all of the stuff, the air that's trapped down by the surface that we're going to use, is rising to the surface. I don't really care about this surface. Let's see, here's one coming up that wasn't there before. They just rise to the surface. So I'm going to carefully just put this aside now, give this 24 hours to dry, and we'll go work on the fuselage. Now the next part of this project is I want to get the top block. Now, even though the real nice way to do this would be to put the bottom block on in a cowl and get this all taped on and then shape the top, I think we're comfortable enough to realize that, you know, we can do that without having to have the bottom in place. Probably even would be more convenient, since the bottom block is delicate until it's glued on. But notice a couple of things that I'm going to try to capture is where the spinner actually meets this and these valve covers join. There's quite a bit of rake up to the cowling. It's not just like a cardinal goes whoop and straight back. This has a very constant curve right up to the front of the canopy, and then from the canopy back it has a taper, and it's very thin in the back. Seafire fuselage in the back is very, very thin because there's no turtle deck, number one. But that's one of the things, that the look I want to try to capture is that thinness in the back. And by the way, that will be a little bit of a help when it comes to keeping a plane from weather vaning. Again, in this view with the some of the things you can see, the counter-rotating props, the thinness in the back of the fuselage is one of the aspects of this that I'm trying to capture. Again, Joe has chosen a different rudder shape, and I'm not sure which one I'll use, but it's this little bit of a jump up into the top block, and then that taper from the canopy back. So all this is what I want to keep in account, and I want to keep looking at these pictures as I'm doing the carving. Now, one of the things I'm going to try to do, I look through all my blocks. When you're going to make a mold, obviously you want to use the worst of the blocks. This is the heaviest block I have. In fact, boink, it's probably 10-pound wood, and you always get a nice supply of them no matter who you order wood from. But what I want to do is, from the side view, I want to try to plot out. The block, of course, isn't long enough. It's only a 36-inch block. I want to just get a rough idea if this is going to be large enough for the curve in the front. This is a kind of a critical curve. Then I want to have the canopy about mid-wing, and then kind of a lot of taper back to here. Okay, so what I'm going to have to do, I'll do the same thing I did in making the bottom block, is trace it out on a top view. Get myself a little block for the back, join it up. Now, a couple of tricks I've fallen for in trying to lay out blocks. You always think you're going to cock it off to one side and save that piece of wood, but then the grain goes off, the block twists. So my suggestion is you run it, no matter what, try to get it running parallel to the grain, not the end of the block. And in this case, that's almost going, believe it or not, almost right down the middle. Leave maybe a 1/16 of an inch or so. Get a nice fat incline on there before that gets trimmed off. Again, a beautiful part of this is you do not need a good piece of wood. Even though if you had a good piece of wood, well, it would be handy because it probably would carve a lot easier, but you can use up all those old, and I'm sure everybody in the world has a whole stack of these, what I call dollhouse wood. This is a good place to use them up. Now, I'm not going to have enough in the back here. Maybe I can join these two together, but I'll see how much of a tailpiece I need for that block. The easiest way I know of to get a nice joint on the back of this is to take both pieces that you're going to use, run them up on a sanding table at 90 degrees. Okay, we got a nice joint up at the nose ring. I'm going to tack that in place. Again, about every 3 or 4 inches, one little drop will do. And let that kick off. Before I move on, I usually start at the front and work my way to the back. And then try to get that to dry nice and flat, of course, so that the mold itself is as flat as possible. Now I'm hoping I can take these two pieces, glue them together. Yeah, in fact, it will be almost a perfect fit. Difficulty, I glued these two together. It's difficult to get this joint nice and flat if you don't have a sanding table. If you don't, you could always glue a block of wood 90 degrees to the table with some sandpaper on and kind of do this just to get your 90-degree angle. But of course, if you have one of these gizmos, it makes it easier. Now you can see how nice that 90-degree table puts the angle in. Now what I want to do, I want to flip this over before I even go to the next step. Trace out so I can get as much of this wood off, the scrap wood, as possible. Can Dremel tool, jigsaw this off. Leave it a little bit extra on the back. Yeah, it's easier to get this off with the saw, otherwise I'd be carving and carving and carving, especially being this taper is going to come back so far. And the first part of this deal is get this glued on. Some slow CA so you have some room to work. If you glue it to the fused side first, then you have a problem. If it's cocked a little bit. This way you have a little bit of variation. You can pick up anything that's wrong. You run your finger along here. And once that joint's established, you get, oh boy, are we having a day with President Nixon. Dig him up, man. Let me get the phone. Now with that whole piece in place, the trick here now is to just try to rough this out. I want to get that curve from the front up to where the canopy is, and then that taper back. Get this all roughed into position, little by little by little, and not get too rushed, too carried away here, because the alternative to doing it this way, if we were to have to carve 2 blocks, or if I was just going to use this block, I would have to do all the hollowing and everything, and I would have to go buy some more of these nice blocks. This is an 1 1/4 block, but I want to really go slow now. I'm just going to take my time, just little by little by little. This is not going to happen in a half an hour. Obviously, the things that are easy to figure out. Brand new blade is in order. It's not carving too bad. Get the corners off first. All the big material that you know you're not going to need. And the closer you get to being where you actually want to have this shape, then you want to get into the razor plane and just take little shavings off. But for right now, we can just start lopping off big chunks. Mentioned it on the making a previous mold. As I get down near the fuse side, I want to put some tape up so I don't run that knife into the fuse side. I want to maintain that thickness right along the edge. And if anything, leave it a little oversized. We can always sand it and put that final little sanding in once the parts are molded. Yeah, I always try to work one side and then get down to where it's almost the contour I want. And then flip it over and then work the hard side. Go back and forth, back and forth. I never try to finish one side first. Back and forth seems a lot easier. Now as I get down to the tail, of course, I'm going to ultimately take a lot of this off, so I'm just roughly blending it into the fuse side, being careful not to hit that tape. Best when you get close to the tape, take very small cuts. Start working on this corner, knocking off the big corners, knocking off as much of the big stuff as I can. And as the closer I get to the tape, the smaller the cuts will be. And probably about halfway through this block, I'll lose this blade and get a new blade. A new blade really makes this. This is not a particularly light piece of wood, but a light blade, a new blade, will always make this work go a lot faster. I try to keep the contour roughly the same because I want to flip-flop back and forth. As you're working down in by the spinner here is a little bit, you want to get that taper and that roll right into the spinner. Little slices. This is where that tape comes in handy as a guide. You can actually feel that tape as the knife gets down close to it, and you know you can just back off. You're starting to really get that blend in there at the nose. I'm just taking a couple of shavings. I'm actually just working up to the cockpit area here. Then I'm going to work the taper from the cockpit back as a separate thing. And best to always check it. Always check it with your hand. Your hand is a lot better than your eye. You just pick up a spot up here where it's a little high. Pick up the high spots. Okay, now with that whole front kind of in rough shape, now I want to start from where the cockpit's going to be and get that taper going back to the back. But I never want to thin it to the point that it's thinner in this dimension than it is in width, or else I'll have kind of an egg-shaped curve. I want to try to keep the thickness, the width, relative to the thickness, and I'm just going to rough that out. Again, this is something you just have to do by eye. Go look at the books, back and forth, back and forth. Getting that taper in will be part of, you know, the final look of the airplane. Now, of course, I can try to take off a nice lopping of this. A lopping, hey, that's a nice word. Just to get some of that taper in there. Looks like I've not taken enough. Again, constant referring back to those books. Boy, those books are invaluable. You never have too many inspirational books. Now, before I try to get that angle, I guess I can do a lot of it with the plane, because the cockpit's going to end roughly there, and I'm only doing this to get a straight line for my taper. When you get down to the last little bit, it's a good idea to set the blade as far back as possible so you just get a paper shaving and you get right up along the tape here. That's what's nice too. Just touching the tape. Well, what this does, it gives you the least amount of sanding, especially if you don't have a sanding bench or you can't sand outside. Less stuff to breathe in. You just take little tiny shavings off. I like to do everything by feel. Just feel where it's high. I still don't have this nose, the curve from where the canopy will be to the spinner exactly how I want it. I'm just going to shave very lightly now. This is getting into the point where I have to constantly check it. I don't want to go too far if I can help it. Always check with the hand. Now, one of the most fun part of this job is cleaning up all these chips. I wish I could find a use for them, you know, feed them to a goat or something. Feed them to my kids. Anyway, that's about as much as we're going to get with the sandpaper and the plane. The rest we'll do with a long sanding block. Look at this stuff. You believe this shit? Now see, this is exactly what I was talking about, knowing that if I ever build another Seafire or another plane with roughly these body dimensions with a bubble canopy or a sliding canopy, I avoid this. This is the whole part I'll never have to do again. Once I do this once, or if you're really, you know, the ultimate non-modeler, you can always call Wendy up and send them some money and have them mold you some blocks. Hey, we've been known to mold blocks for other people. Now I'm just trying to get, even though I'm going to re-sand this once I pull it off and undersize it a little bit, get a reasonably nice contour here. Again, constantly checking with my hand more than anything else. And this part of the thing can be a little time consuming anyway. Using 220 paper and a block. Then what I usually do at the end is I'll finalize it with a big long block just to make sure I don't have any ripples in that. I'll finalize it with that when I get all of the little bellies and bows out of it. I've gone up into the tape just a little bit, so I've started to peel back the edge of the tape. That won't really matter in the final analysis. And from looking at the books, it looks like I've pretty close got the contour I'm going to wind up with here. Just right up into the tape, just so you can see that tape just starting to be a blend. Okay, the next step I want to do, get a brand new razor and pop this so I have the mold in my hand and cut, same as the bottom block, cut and undersize it all along the way. There you can see, I've taken just a little bit of the tape off right on the edge. You still have that little edge. As soon as you know you're in that edge, that's a good time to quit. Because after these are glued on permanently, then you can get that final contour right in there. Now at this point in time, you want everything to be just a little bit oversized. That's why we have those little stringers in there. This will all get that final curve after everything's assembled. This just gets off the little molding. Those little chips that stay on where you tack glued it. Everything should be just about a 1/64 of an inch oversized here to allow for that final sanding. Okay, now this is the amount I'm going to try to undersize it, same as the bottom block, but now it's real important up at the nose not to overdo it. It's a lot easier to make it a little too wide and then add little strips to the inside of the shell rather than having to add them to the outside or add Bondo or whatever that would be. So I'll just, the same as I did the bottom block, I don't have to do, this is not too high tech, I just want to undersize that edge and then blend it as I go around. So, you know, what the plane allows you to do is just get right up to the incline, but not take the incline off. That's what I'd like to have happen. And now there's a little ridge there. Well, obviously now I want to get a couple of cuts on that and just blend that right in. Now the next step will be to get this, oh my God, this phone, unbelievable. President Nixon, I'll be right there. Okay, with that all roughed in, now just the final thing is with the sanding block, get this all dressed off, and then check that it's undersized, it's just right on that. That's what I love about carving. Boy, once you have molds, say goodbye to carving. Breathing all this crap in. Trying to get that blend between where I took down the edge. Again, your hand is the most useful tool for finding high spots. Now, I just spoke to Dave Midgley on the phone before. In fact, that was him that called. And he's going to be coming down with his Cardinal sometime next week or the week after. And we're going to try to make some molds up for the Cardinal. Now, what that'll be nice is it'll give the people that buy the kits an option of buying the molded parts, and you won't need all the blocks. You can save the blocks for some other project. So, looking forward to that. Flying season's just about over, and if not over, should be really getting into high gear here soon. The last thing is just to undercut this for the wire. See, I can still see the incline on in spots. I've got just about the right amount off of there. Now on a top block, you can always undersize this. This is going to spring just a little bit. And I leave it oversized here because I'm going to put some little wraps of sheeting inside here and then get the final little taper by hand. But what I'm really looking at is I have the undersizing. Because don't forget, the wood just does pop just a little bit. Okay, that's certainly within a range that's acceptable. Now the next step is I want to mount this up on a piece of scrap balsa wood, whatever, and get the wire along the edge, same as the bottom block mold. Bottom block mold. Try saying that fast 10 times. Okay, now I'll glue this right in position. The only reason I put the line on here was I really want to be able to see it when I get over by the saw. The lighting in that room is not that good. Always easier to have the piece glued in place and then just run the saw down it rather than trying to saw the piece on the bottom and then trying to get it to stick. It'll always be a little bit off. Glue the piece on and then trim it. And that should leave just enough gouge for that wire. Now when you wind up having an oversized mold, this is over length, Always stagger the joints, just like doing masonry work. Don't put two brick seams right on top of each other. Stagger them. And actually, I should have staggered this even a little more, but I'm trying to use up some really rock hard scrap wood. I don't think this will be a factor. Now, if I haven't said it enough times, what makes this whole thing work is this little wire embedded into the joint. Because that joint should be, in theory, be perfectly straight. And I'm just going to let this tack up. There it goes. Once it's in place, a little bit longer. In fact, I'll even hit it with some kicker here. Without this wire, no matter how you try to do this, it's a problem. I haven't found a better way than the wire. Okay, once that's in place, then I like to tack the front. Then that little notch, when you undercut the block, that little notch that's there, just from sanding off the corner, gives you a little alignment. Now you can wiggle it, and it just drops right down into that notch. Do a couple inches at a time, and just let it kick. And what I do, I just work that down into the notch. You can see it smoking off there. This is the one step I've heard other people that have been doing molding say, oh, that's difficult getting that wire in the notch. Well, you got to work your way a little bit at a time. Boy, when you think of the work you save by doing this, when you think of all those garbage cans full of chips and your wallet empty from buying $20 top blocks, you get it into proportion as to how it's worth. Hey, Noel Dindrick just called me and told me he's going to send me a new calendar, and on the front page of the calendar, the #1 shot is a Mark V Spitfire, so be looking forward to seeing that. Now, because we have 36-inch wire, I'm going to have to cut two little pieces to join the back, and the joint won't really matter. We're only using that just to mark the level plane that we're going to be cutting this on. Okay, just one final check to make sure nothing has changed here. I'll find up, getting dust everywhere here today. Find a piece of sheeting now that's just a little bit bigger than this. I may be able to get this out of a 4-inch piece. If not, I'll have to put a joint somewhere. But I certainly would like to have 48-inch wood if I can. I'll have to go over to the pile and see what. This is the whole thing now. Instead of needing that big giant block, 1.5 inch block, 48 inches long, and have a joint, all I need is a $2 piece of sheeting. Now, it looks like of all the pieces I have, these are all sea grain. I only got 2, and these really aren't good pieces of wood. This one's kind of A grainy. This one's kind of B grainy. Now, what I did off camera, just to save a little time, I wrapped this just like we did the bottom block mold, put a good squeeze on it, got the ammonia fumes out of it, and right around the front and the back, because this has an extreme draft angle up at the front as it goes into the nose ring, I really squashed that down the last little bit. Now, also off camera, while we were just puttering around here, Rich Peabody stopped by. He has ordered up one of the new 60s that are out, the Randy's, I don't know if he calls them Aero 60s or Randy 60s or whatever. He wants to get one. And I tried to talk him into, if he would, bring it over here so we could take a look at it. And maybe even put it in one of the planes, go out and get some tests flying on it or whatever. So we'll look forward to maybe seeing what one of those 60s runs like. And I mean in the real world, not in the sales brochures. And I suspect it's probably a real good motor. And it's funny how, just mentioning funny things, how years ago, I mean, you could go back and read the magazine articles. Everybody would say, oh, you got to stick with a 40 for the 015 line. Stick with a 40, stick with a 40. You know what? And Windy said, no. Lose the 015s, go to a 60. Isn't it funny now? Everybody's going to 60s. Just in the nick of time, too. Funny how, where are they now, huh? I don't rub it in. I'm not mean. Anyway, not to make a point, but believe me, the future of stunt is wrapped around 60s, not around 40s. Okay, that's ready to dry. Now this is the bottom block mold. This is the original one we made. And off camera I had made this one just to save a little time. I didn't get to true it up, I don't have the angle. This is for the second fuselage. So now I see I've got all the angles, the trimming done. I'll put this one aside. In fact, I'll tape it right to the other fuselage. And as soon as we'll be able to mold up some cowlings, I'll be ready to go on to the next step with all these. I need the other cowling, because what I want to do is use the actual cowling to do all the cutting and edging on. And this is the part of this program I just love, is you just imagine if you had to go back and carve all this crap and have that whole garbage can full of chips just forever to be able to mold these up. Now, I mentioned to Rich another thing I thought might be appropriate. If he decides to build a 60 ship, Cardinal or whatever, or even Midgley, we probably could use this bottom block on any plane that had 1.5 inch spacing between the mounts and 1/2 inch mounts. This probably will become a generic, well-used mold in times to come. And this is the other thing. Now, even though these are probably real close, and they are interchangeable, I like to keep one set of parts with each fuse. I don't like to play mix and match. I like to keep them together. So I'll tape this one on, just so it doesn't wind up going to Rich Peabody's house. By the way, he does want to mold some parts. Let's see him reach into that big deep wallet of his and come up with some money. Peabody, you make a good living, I'm going to charge you. Just kidding around. Anyway, he is working again. He was kind of on the unemployed list last year for a little while. Anyway, this will just be for storage. I mean, these are just about as close to being the same as you can make them. Now, while those blocks are, those molds are cooking up here, I want to start roughing this out. I want to start making up a pattern or a template and look around for a real crappy block here, because I want to have the relatively hard piece of wood if I can. This is kind of a, well, it's not going to be kind, it's going to be the focal point of the plane. And I really want to have all the angles and all the ribs and riblets. Talked to Midgley today, and what we're going to try to do maybe is make the mold in 2 different pieces so that it'll join together when you slide the canopy closed, or stay open when you leave it open. So hopefully, well, the first step in anything is let's get it roughed out. Let's look for a block and get it roughed out, even a little bit oversized. See, this is why it's real important to have books. Yeah, I can get it from this angle. These angles of the ribs and everything are critical. And I can also get a lot of the details that are going to be inside here to make them prototypical. Now, just one other idea. If we ever make another Spitfire, we can make that piece of the canopy slide back. And I'm sorry now I didn't do it. Even though we did have a concourse winner without it, with it would have even been more special. And that's one of the nice things about the Spit. This canopy, when it slides back, this part is flat and then it tapers up. It's kind of an unusual shape. Now that's another thing I never even thought of. I'll be able to, well, assuming I get this done, I'm not all hot air. I get this finished, I can fly with the model with the cockpit open or with the cockpit shut, and I'll definitely try to engineer it up that I can fly both ways, or fly with the pilot in or the pilot out, assuming George doesn't make a pilot that stays in. Be able to take the pilot in and out. So this is what I'm going to try to engineer up, is that the cockpit, the canopy mold is in 2 pieces. The front piece will be one and the back piece will be the second part. And when they slide in, it'll be like a tongue and groove. Be interesting to see, just another thought, interesting to see if the model's going to fly better with the cockpit open. Say in a wind it'll control whip up. Boy, can you imagine a controversy? No more tuned pipes. You open a cockpit to control whip up. Oh man, I can hear it now. Yeah, that is. This is the part, I'm just trying to get this in my head straight. It's this flat angle here, and then it goes up, and this back part will have the contour of the fuselage in it. Now I've been looking through my blocks. I haven't really found one that's appropriate here, but I'm going to try to laminate one together. I just want to make a rough, maybe I'll just get this roughed out tonight. There's not much time left. Get this roughed out so I can start getting a picture in my mind's eye of how this is going to be. Now, as I sometimes try to do here, I just look at the picture, look at the fuselage, and try to get what I hope is I rough it out. Now it's kind of flat around the top and has a pretty good taper going back. This end is coming down on about that angle. It has the flat spot, and of course there's going to be a lot of mind's eye going back and forth here. And I always feel like, see, we're not doing a scale model, but even if you were, if you're wrong, it's better to have the canopy a little bit too big than a little bit too small. Always better to be a little bigger than smaller. It makes like a caricature. Now just some of the things as I'm trying to get that I have the angle of the bars, I have that pretty close. The front angle, pretty close. A little bit of this bar is going to show in terms of a side rib. The front piece is going to be dead flat. Again, I won't really know until I start carving away here and whacking and hacking. Okay, this piece is going to have a bar across here, up the back. This is just the roughest of rough. But I just don't know any other way you really could do this other than I could put this in a photo enlarger, but no. I really probably wouldn't come out any better because I wouldn't get the scale right. This way I'm getting that overall impression of a scale the way I want it. If anything, this has to have a little more, I'll put an arrow to, a little more of a curvature in the top. I think that's going to be close. I just tape that in position even though I don't have the top block, just to get a rough idea of if I'm close. I'm a little on the big side. I know I need more of a curve up here. But again, I'm just trying to rough this out. I want to get the block roughed out if possible tonight. Got a little bit of time here to spend. If I can get this roughed out, I'll be one step ahead. See, the idea is I want to get this up to Midgley as soon as possible too, so he can actually do the physical molding of the canopies. Now I want to make sure I give part of the credit for what I'm doing here to Keith Trossel. He was pretty inspirational at the last Nats when I saw his Martin Baker with that canopy. Man, that flipped me out. But he gave me some good ideas. I'm going to try to use them. This canopy, much like a Martin Baker canopy, has some flats up in the front. So what I'm really going to do is cut this up from 3 pieces and leave the middle piece to actually use as my center line and put one on each side. And then from this, using this as the center now, I can taper it out. Much like making a laminated prop blade where you can see the laminates in each prop blade. This will be a good way to do it. And we don't care about the joint because we're ultimately going to cover it all with Bondo anyway. So now I'm adding a little bit of material to the top because I want to get that curve in there. And I think what I've done is I've made this piece too short now looking at it. So I want to trim, before I make the next piece, I want to trim some of this off. I think I've made this flat too long. This flat is really about 1/3, maybe a little less. So what I'll do is I'll trim this. Now, as we always do, and I always suggest you do, cut one piece, glue it to the other piece, or in this case we really can only get 2 in the saw, so I'll have to cut them apart. By doing this, you don't wind up with 3 pieces, and then after you sand them all flat, they're smaller than the original piece. Now I will be able to get all 3 of these out of one piece. I was afraid I wouldn't. Now it's kind of a little bit of a different, you just can't buy a SIG canopy here, even if you weren't going to have a take-apart canopy. You just can't go buy a SIG Spitfire canopy. It's never going to be the right scale or shape, and this is not a compromise model made for expediency. Getting these angles and shapes and everything right is more time consuming, and in this part of it I'm probably going to go back and forth many times, but I think a good place to start is to make the original plug just a little bit oversized in all dimensions so I can finish it up. We'll unwrap the top block tomorrow and then I can do all the final cutting, but right now, just to get this roughed out, and it really will fit out of one piece. Even though I don't like to do it this way, I have no choice. It doesn't fit in my saw when it's all glued together. I would always prefer to glue these together first. I'll true them up on a belt sander so it won't matter. Remember, this block is plenty oversized, especially in width. There's plenty of extra material to get the curves in. It's much bigger than it has to. Probably could even get away with 2 blocks. Now you can see it's a little bit wider in all dimensions, so the first thing I can do is, certainly no part of it is going to go past the end. But I want to keep this the middle piece in here for my own reference, so I can go and just sand some of this off. Really, just get that end. I was thinking about this. What I'm going to do is try to get a top view of this, and I'll trace this out with a pen. Try to get a top view of this, and I can set up my big bandsaw to do most of the cutting. Grinding this away is just going to make a lot of dust. Thinking about this a little bit, and again, this is part of the fun, is as you go along, there's always some new invention. I just want to have the blocks trued up. I know I can take maybe a 1/4 inch off each side, and I can interpolate what that contour, that top view is going to be. So I think I'll try that with the bandsaw. Now what I try to establish here first is the maximum width. Again, that's about a 1/4 inch off each side. And then by looking down at the, get some dust, looking down at how the canopy tapers, it's flat for the first maybe 1/3. So up till about here I don't want any taper at all, because this is the part of the canopy that's going to move. That's not going to move, I mean. And then I'll try to just interpolate this in. See, now this is where it's handy to have that center block, because I can reference off each side and see if I'm keeping it symmetrical. Having that center block in there is really handy. And if you didn't have a center block, you might want to have some kind of a center line or run some masking tape down there. And that pretty much, well, we have to see when we cut it out. Now after a little test fit here, I realize it's still a little bit too big. I'm going to take another 1/8 inch off with the saw, and then I'll start putting the curve in. I want to have about 1/8 of an inch less on each side when I'm done. See, the problem is you got to take into account the material itself is going to be 40 thousandths or so big. So I don't want to have this too big. I need about this plug to be about 40 thousandths less than the actual part that Midgley's going to mold. That's about the right amount of clearance I want to leave on each side. That'll take into account the material itself. Okay, now I'm trying to interpolate. See how much of a curve is in this bubble? I'm trying to interpolate. This is a flat, bulletproof glass here. So I want to try to interpolate that. Now where the hell would I put the block? I'm just trying to rough this out by hand to get that shape in there. Now I try to look at this from a lot of different angles just to get an idea of how I'm going to like this. I flattened this front out a little more. I'm going to redraw that line in there. Just looking at it before I start the carving, because once I start carving, this goes in a hurry. Now this is where having that center block is a real handy thing. I'm just looking at that and trying to get this in proportion. Again, this is just a back and forth thing here. This is just back and forth until it looks in proportion right. I tried to interpolate here just a little bit the top view. And now I'm going to get a brand new number 26 blade and start roughing this out little by little. Now just roughing this out is one of the easy parts. It's getting all the little details on it's going to take time, so I don't know how much time I'm going to have left tonight. I'm just going to do as much of the roughing out as I can. It'll be getting the ribs in and making the mating parts that'll take time, but just an idea, just getting it roughed out. Yeah, it's starting to shape up. Just takes a little time. And again, this is one of those things, as I start to see the shape I'm looking for, I'm trying to refer back to that Seafire book. Now as I'm going along, I'm just going to try to dress this off and just keep looking at that manual. This part of it I think is the easy part. It's that front part where the ribs are, and I'm going to try to make them out of plywood if I can. I'm trying to put a nice final sanding on this back piece before I will lay out the ribs. Again, I'm trying to improvise a little bit as I go along here. Since this is the first one of these we've done, there may be some re-engineering along the way, but we'll definitely give it our best try. It's starting to look like a canopy anyway. Now this is what's handy. This is what's handy about having this centerpiece. Is by looking even at the bottom, I can see which side I'm favoring, and then I can just dress off the side that has too much material on it. Without that center, I'd be just throwing darts in the dark here. I notice one side is a lot rounder than the other, and a couple of shots of the sandpaper, I can bring it right into alignment. But having that center block there is really a big help. Okay, the first piece I want to make up is this bulletproof. By the way, this, for anybody who doesn't know, this is bulletproof glass here. So we're going to make up this front piece probably out of a piece of plywood, and just glue it right on until we can get this flat look. These three pieces are relatively flat. Now to start off with, I made up just a template out of 16th plywood. That'll be my flat piece of bulletproof glass, and now I'll trace this out on 1/8 inch plywood, so I can have that rib cage that goes around it. Again, you got to do a little figuring and interpolating here. You don't know what this is going to look like until you lay it all out. Maybe it'll be a little too big, a little too small, but you won't know until you finish it. Now again, you just have to do a lot of this by eye, but I'm trying to just get a rough idea of what that would look like in this dimension. Remember that old thing I always say, the devil is in the details. This is one of those details that's probably going to be very time consuming to get right. I want to get this bulletproof glass to be about as realistic as I can possibly get. And it's going to take some time making up some of these little parts for the mold. So cut this out of 1/8 inch plywood. And this is going to go in front of this. And this will be for my bulletproof glass for that front piece. Now with this little piece made up, I want to seal all the edges again. This will help when it comes time to put the final finish on this. All the edges get sealed. This is a relatively complex canopy, by the way. This is And don't forget, the Stuka canopy is probably the only one that's worse, but Midgley's already got those, and we have them in stock if you're building a Stuka. Now the next thing I want to lay out is the bars that go across here. Now this is kind of tricky because the bars actually sweep forward. They actually sweep back. I'm looking at it ass backwards. So I want to lay these around, and I want to make them up out of layers of 64th plywood. I'm just going to strip off. I just did this to get an idea. With the grain going lengthwise, I want to strip off some 64th plywood and just build it up in layers until it's as high as I want it to be. Now what I did, I changed the position. You can see where I ripped this up because I didn't have the angle back at exactly the right height, or a height that I was happy with. So now I've just got this tacked on at the edges. Now I can look right from the top and get it perfectly even and glue it on, and then put 3 or 4 more laminates of 64th ply there for that band. So now I'm just guessing that 2 layers of 64th is going to look about right when I get done sanding and bondoing this thing. But again, it's a lot of back and forth. I didn't know how many layers I'd need here. 2 felt about right. Looks about right anyway. Anyway, even if I just get this rough stuff done tonight, I'll be way ahead of the game tomorrow. Because obviously one of the things I have to do is get this mold up to Midgley, have them mold up some canopies before I can go on to detailing. And I'd like to have details inside the canopy, rivet heads and whatever. So this is kind of a critical thing. Now what I'm doing is sealing the edges with some thin CA and then just wiping it with a Q-tips to try to seal up that edge. It'll make the sand out a lot easier. See, I'm trying to get, it's this angle. I'm referencing off the photo, this angle and the nose piece. Okay, here we are, and we got up to this point here tonight. I want to fill this with Bondo. I just put some Bondo in here to get this ridge cleaned up. And then I'll have this will be the bulletproof glass part of the canopy will be finished. And then I can go back over it and put the ridge up. Now this is 2 layers of 64th and everything else is 1. So this ridge should stick up just a little higher to make that joint, that the tongue and groove joint that I want. And I tried to see the angle of the ridge and the angle of the front, try to get that real close. And it took a little more time than I thought it would. Right, I just got the first level of Bondo on here just to make this, that I have Bondo over the raw wood. I don't want any raw wood showing. And so what I'll do is I'll sand this out and then I'll build 1 more layer of 64th plywood up over the ribs. And then this will hopefully sink down in a little bit and you know, give me the detailing. I'll be able to detail and scribe that out. I know you'll get a kick out of this. I spent the whole night tonight making chips and plywood and all this little junk, really, to just arrive at this, the amount of stuff I have on the canopy. But again, it's just glued 64th strips. Now what I'm going to do is, this is just wood. I'm going to soak that with CA to harden it up and then start to get a couple coats of auto primer on this, that spray Krylon primer. And maybe by a day or 2 get it up to Midgley. And again, I'm just working off of that drawing, the corners, the angles. Now I really don't know how accurate this is relative to the scale modeling, but I do have the recess for the bulletproof glass, the double supports up here, and pretty much, well, hope I've captured that overall look. But again, still needs to be final sanded, the wood hardened. Couple more steps, maybe I'll get some of this done later, but this has been a lot of little detail work, just one of those little devil in a detail specials. Now this is the part where it really gets to be fun, trying to build up some coats of thick CA on here and trying to wipe them fast enough that they don't glue the paper towel to the part. You really need to make this rock hard, and I think this will do it, before I start with the primer. This wants to be all hard. You don't want any soft balsa. Now I got about 4 coats of thick CA on here, sanding each one out, and basically the hardest part to get is the corner. Remember that tool we made up with the angle? Well, I've got some fine sandpaper on that, and I'm trying to get all the little details relieved, get in all the corners and edges here. It's kind of time consuming and boring, but hey, I want this plug. I want to get a coat of primer on this tonight if I can. I really have put a lot of time. It doesn't show up on the video, but this was very time consuming. But I'm hoping we'll have a lifetime supply, even for you, of Seafire canopies. And it does look pretty realistic anyway. Okay, the next step here, and we're really running out of time now. It's on, okay. I got a little handle so I can hold this while I'm auto primered. I got this all sanded down with 400 nice, about 5 coats of thick CA wiped on with a paper towel. I think that's ready for a coat of primer. I don't know if I've got the look, but it's as good as it's going to be tonight. This has been a long day. I guess 4 or 5 coats would do here. A little bit of sanding between coats. Boy, this is the kind of information I love to get. Everybody that I know that likes Tiger 60s or Tiger 60 type of motors has been looking for rev-up props. Well, Bill found I had 60 or 50 of them here, 30, I don't know, 33 props. So, listen, here's the address. Bill Hummel, thank you for passing this on. It's in Finley's Hobbies, Wichita, Kansas, 316-683-4221. Bill sent a bunch of props, so it looks like we're back in action here. Anybody need some rev-up props, check this out. I wouldn't say I was handsome. Now it's amazing how nice this Krylon primer sands, and I guess 4 or 5 coats is all I'm going to need here, but you can just see how quick this sands right down. I said hello. She says hello, come right over. When I got there, she took one look at my nose and said, "You sure must have hurried. You forgot to hang up the phone." Yes, it's kind of but I want to be mysterious. You just see how quick that comes right off. No, I really did spend a lot of time on this. I can't believe I spent this much time making a mold, and from this point on, it's up to Mr. Dave Midgley to do his magic. And I hope he's going to be able to take some video of maybe making up these canopies, just for the record. See, getting in those ridges is where it really takes a lot of time, just to get the corner of the sandpaper right in the ridge. There you can see how rough that was. You can see by how the primer has sanded off all of the low spots. And it's just a question of putting this on coat after coat and sanding it off so we have a nice smooth shell finish. Actually, this canopy does look a lot like a Seafire canopy. I have to give myself a little credit here. I'm not too putsy tonight. Ah! See, that stuff even happens to me. You get a little mistake, just put the primer right over it. The hell with it. We're going to sand it out anyway. And see, even if you drop the part, you can have it. That front looks nice. That really does look like the bulletproof glass part of the canopy too.
When I got there, she took one look at my nose and said,
Well, we're at the end of this tape. We're close to the end. We're at the end. I don't even know where we are. It's been such a long day. I'm dropping parts and whatever, but I think we do have the bones of this mold. And I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you'll share it with, obviously, with all your other friends. Assuming you have some friends. Share it with everybody. Have a few laughs. The adventure of the Seafire continues, and we will pick it up on the next tape. I'm so glad we got to this point. I really feel like this is starting to shape up to be a, you know, it's a real airplane now. It really is shaping up. And by the next tape, we'll have some top blocks. Be working on all our final fits on the fusee. Maybe see Joe Adamusco. Get together with him and work on the wings. It's coming. Oh, I love the smell of this stuff too. So pleasant. Anyway, I hope this gives you some ideas for stuff. Maybe you can be upgrading your model skills, or maybe you just like seeing me bust my ass. Either way, it's okay. And to Julia, I want pictures of that shop. I know you got a lot of money, to Julia. Send me some pictures of that shop. Now I'm going to close out the little time that's left here. George brought some pictures over of the steam train trip that we were on. And hey, if you're interested in steam trains, I'll be glad to send you a free copy of the video. It was fun. Got some pictures that George took, and I'm going to close out this tape with those pictures. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you on the next tape.
I could show the world how to smile. I could be glad all of the while. I could change the gray skies to blue if I had.
This really was a hell of a trip. I really have to say that. And these are George's pictures, and I thank George for sharing them with us.
Days behind, leave all my pals. I'd never mind. I could start my whole life anew if I had you. I could climb the snow-capped mountain, sail the mighty ocean wide. I could cross the burning desert if I had you by my side. I could be a king deer uncrowned, humble or poor, rich or renowned. There is nothing I couldn't do if I had you.
And if you haven't seen that footage with me up on top of the tower, hey, don't miss it. It's worth it. Some beautiful pictures. Now he'll be making an oil painting, and we'll have that on a tape too.
I could be a king deer uncrowned, humble or poor, rich or renowned. There is nothing I couldn't do if I had you. fired every trick